Hi, my name is Brennan Johnson, and my theme is change over time in human form. So, with my theme being so broad, I just chose human form presentation as being the change over time, because change over time can be attributed to many things. It can attribute to architecture, animals presented. So I just chose a more specific topic within the topic being human form because that's a very frequent topic within the course. So that's why I chose it, and you're going to see that now. Okay, so for Unit 1, I chose a female figurine found in Mexico. And why I chose this, because you see, with the theme I'm going for changing human form, I wanted to have a general timeline here in how human form would change as we see from like earlier pieces, such as this one from Unit 1, as we go up to like Unit 10. So with this female figurine here, you can see she has two faces, she has very stubby arms, but she has very wide hips and very noticeable breast. And this wasn't completely intentional because she is supposed to represent like fertility, birth, and some art historians maybe think she maybe represents a deity of sorts, given the two faces and the hairstyle she has. But it's a pretty given thing that in Unit 1, these kind of figurines that they're very rudimentary, but they still display these themes of fertility because that's what was seen as most important back then in these kind of ancient societies. Now for Unit 2, I actually chose two pieces, but the first one is this from is the Seated Scribe, and I chose this because in Unit 2 there's a, multiple pieces you can choose from, but I want to choose two. One that was non-idealized, being Seated Scribe, or one you're going to see later. So for the Seated Scribe, you can see he has red orange skin. He's very relaxed. He's sitting upright, and he doesn't seem idealized at all. He's actually quite chubby, and that would suggest that he had a more relaxed lifestyle. He wasn't really active, and this was actually made to commemorate a scribe in Egypt because scribes back then were seen as like very notable because they were seen as like because they were literate and not many people were literate. So you see a scribe, he's not idealist at all because he's not really meant to like represent an actual like standard for like men back then, at least not in Egypt with this piece. But for our second piece, we have the spear bearer from Pompeii in Italy. And while this one right now is a Roman copy, it's identical to the original Greek piece, was based off of unit of bronze. But still, this is a direct contrast to see it scribe because it's a completely idealized figure. You have this very athletic white male. He has abs, he has muscles, he has everything that you would want in a man. At least that was the standard back then. So as a contrast to see his scribe, he's very idealized. He was most likely placed in front of a gym as like a way of saying, hey, this is the way you should look. So because you can start to see how human form was made as an idealized form and non-idealized forms. Now, this is going in time order. Now we're in Unit 7 because Unit 3 will happen later. So for this, I chose the neon Buddhas in Afghanistan. And you see with the Buddhas, not necessarily idealized or not idealized, but you're starting to see the presentation of religious figures in human form. As we attribute ourselves to the deities we choose to worship, and you can see that in Buddha here. Now, this Buddha in particular, you can see his face is missing, his legs are off. This is due to the context of the piece as it was attacked by Taliban forces in 2001 as part of their campaign against Buddhism, but still you can get the general form of the piece in that it was made to just represent Buddha and not necessarily be idealized or non-idealized. So it's just representing Buddha and their religion at the time. And now we're going back to idealized form here with the goddess Venus, who represented Here you can see she's a very relaxed pose. She's nude. Seems like a very quaint piece. Now, this piece, you can start to see how female nudes are starting to be presented. This is kind of like some of idealization, but it's more so made to be erotic for the male gaze. It's made as like a erotic sensual piece. And now you're starting to see how we represent God and goddesses in more than just like a worshiping sense. 9, this actually comes after Venus and Rubino in the 18th, 19th century, but it's just in a much more rudimentary society. As it's in Micronesia. So the female deity. Now, compared to Venus and Rubino and even the first figure we looked at from Mexico, she's very, very rudimentary. She doesn't have a face. She doesn't have any features besides the fact that you can see she has a broad chest. And if you look closely in her crotch area, you can see female parts there. And this goes back to that theme of fertility that was seen in the figure from Mexico. As she doesn't really have a face, she has no identifying characteristics other than you can see that she's clearly female. So she's very rigid, she's very blocky, she's tall, elongated, and this was likely put in a group of other figures of the size and stature. And it was just likely made as a way to worship fertility, to try to bring that into the tribe. So even though we're going to the 18th and 19th century, there's still these kind of human forms represented in more, I guess, tribal societies as opposed to ones in Europe that choose to like idealize figures. Now onto Unit 5 in the late 19th century at the Transformation Mask in Canada. Now for Unit 5, there wasn't much outside of this because, and this is pretty interesting as it's not only human, but it's also an animal form. So the artists, they chose to combine human and animal. As on the outside, it seems like an ordinary hawk mask or like maybe a falcon or an eagle. But then you can pull a string to split it open and guess what's inside? It's a human face. Now, this would make sense given the context that these masks were used in ceremonies to depict like stories of these people who could transform into animals, with this individual here being able to transform into an eagle. So now I can see how you can just see how people can incorporate other things like animals into human form to represent other kind of beings and ceremonies. Let's see, Unit 6, we had this figure from Africa from the 19th or 20th century. Now again, there's not necessarily an evolution in time because different societies have evolved differently. So obviously, or I just have different cultures. So this very blocky, elongated figure, yes, he does have smooth curves. He's very empowering, and that makes sense given his function as he was made to sit on top of important family boxes that held important relics. And you can see him, he has muscles, he has an elongated belly button, which was a common staple of culture. He has his hairpiece out. He looks just very empowering. He looks very, let's say, stoic, and that of course that makes sense given his function. So now you can see how different societies represent human form for different functions and for different purposes. Now Unit 4, or the Kiss in 1916, you can see how even though in this time in 1916, obviously we aren't in private societies anymore, we aren't going to make these kind of pieces for the functions that we did back then, Brancusi, he saw this kind of evolution in how we presented ourselves and how like maybe like in Rome, it was very idealized, very realistic, modern paintings in 1916. And he specifically chose to go back to that kind of primal art style with this very, very blocky, very rigid form of the Kiss, which heavily contrasts other forms of the Kiss we've seen. And with this, it's like one block, but carved into two figures that are obviously kissing. Now, he made this specifically to harken back to those primal time periods. And his goal with this was to make it like as simple as possible, but still conveying the idea of romance. Now to Unit A in 1967, we have Chairman Mao onward to Anyuan. Now, with this, you can start to see how we're incorporating human form into propaganda, as what this was made as communist propaganda in times of conflict during China. And it depicts Chairman Mao like conquering nature. He's not looking at nature, but you can see him, he's looking off into the distance. And this was made more so to represent how he's looking off into the future. And him turning his back on nature and walking through these mountains, that can be interpreted as him again conquering nature for the people of China. So as this isn't necessarily made for art's sake, it's made for propaganda. So human form is now being circulated through propaganda, art, made as fertility figures, so on. Now, lastly, for Unit 10, we have Praying Mantra in 2006. It's made of mixed media. Now, this is going back to art's sake, purely for art's sake. And you can see it's very vivid, very colorful. You can see that bright pink woman sitting right there staring at you. And the artist made this specifically to comment on female stereotypes and beauty standards found in Africa at the time. And she wanted to like put a twist on that. And now instead of maybe a woman being like a submissive, maybe inferior gender, now the woman is hunting you. She's preying on you, given the title Praying Mantra. And that makes sense given the context that Praying Mantis is. The female is much bigger, is much stronger, and during mating, they would actually kill the male. So you can see the woman's leg, it represents a praying mantis's claws. So now, circling all the way back to Unit 10, we can see art for art's sake again, but it's kind of evolved into a way that we can comment on stereotypes. You can have social and political commentary. Propaganda is not as much in use. So yes, now we're back to art for art's sake. We can use this for commentary. It's not necessarily made to serve a specific function anymore. So overall, human form has become more realistic. However, different artists now can choose how they depict the human form, from Brancusi's The Kiss being very rudimentary to the Praying Mantra being very realistic and opting for a political commentary. And it doesn't necessarily give a evolutionary timeline, as you can see with the Spear Bearer all the way back in Rome, and then The Kiss by Brancusi, which is very simplistic in comparison to that. So overall, you can see human form, it's most likely changed throughout history, not in how it's necessarily presented, but in its use. As in primal times, it was used to like represent deities for worship. And as you go on, paintings were commissioned for dukes, for kings. And then as you go on, propaganda, and then now finally to modern times, it's art for art's sake, made for commentary. So human form has had its evolution, not necessarily through appearance, but through function.